Listeners, beware. This podcast contains themes of the macabre and does not shy away from the details. Our content is graphic and our language is colorful. We might not be your cup of tea, so listener discretion is strongly advised. Hosted by two best friends with a proclivity to decipher the deeply demented minds of murderers.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 4 of The Killer Tea. On today's episode, we will be discussing the unsolved case,
The Long Island serial killer.
We are your hosts, Christina
and Chelsea.
Hi, guys.
We're still here and alive.
The story is Chelsea's husband hurt his back, which delayed us being able to record because Chelsea has 3 crotch goblins and I have a brand new one. Sorry, but we're back. We're on our bullshit.
We're recording finally.
We're going to get this out to you as soon as possible, and we're sorry. We love you.
We hope you missed us.
Yeah, we missed you. We have a good one for you. And yes, as a special treat, it's out of our normal realm of things that we do. We normally only cover solved cases.
And this is an unsolved goodie.
I think we've only ever covered one unsolved one before. Do you remember who it was?
Yes, the Cleveland torso killer.
The torso killer, yeah. And that one was back in like the 18 or 1900s.
Yeah.
This one
is very recent.
Yeah, in the 2010s. Like, that's crazy.
Like, the serial killer is probably still out there, y'all.
So, without any further ado,
let's jump right on in.
Let's jump right on in. Am I setting the mood or setting the scene?
You go ahead.
Right.
Start us off. Why not?
The Long Island serial killer is a strange, twisted, and unsolved series of murders spanning back 10, 20, maybe even 40 odd years. Like I said earlier, we typically only cover the solved cases. This one was too important to pass up. The LISK killer, or Lisk killer as he sometimes goes by, is still at large, and he continues to baffle and stump the Suffolk County Police Department in New York and everyone else that's involved.
People say that the Long Island serial killer is quintessentially the American version of Jack the Ripper. He or she specifically targeted young, attractive women, some that were known escorts, and dismembering their bodies.
In particular, with the Jack the Ripper comparison, I don't think Jack the Ripper was an organized killer. I think he was very disorganized because he was messy. Where do we start with this case? The timeline is honestly a bit convoluted. Do we start in the 1980s with the disappearance of Tina Foglia, who was only 19 years old when she was last seen on February 1st, 1982, at a music venue in West Islip, New York? Then 2 days later, the teenager's body was found with her dismembered body placed into 3 separate garbage bags. No arrests were made. The case went cold. But as far as we're concerned, hers is the first known case that shares any eerily familiar details with the Long Island serial killings we know today.
Or do we start with Shannon Gilbert, who is essentially the only reason this Mod Podge of a case has even gained traction in the last decade? Shannon Gilbert was another young woman of just 23 years old who disappeared in Oak Beach on May 1st, 2010. The harrowing tale of her disappearance is fraught with horror, mystery, and has left her family and the police completely stumped for over a decade.
Shannon was a beautiful young woman working in New York City as a professional online escort. Shannon booked a client off of Craigslist named Joseph Brewer, who was just a single guy living in Oak Beach, which was a gated community. And then she had her driver, Michael Pack, deliver her to Joseph's home around 2 a.m. There's an interesting thing I learned about this term driver. Drivers like Pack were essentially hired by prostitutes to act as their transport, protection, errand boys, and received a cut of the profits. However, sometimes they played more of a pimp role. In this circumstance, I don't really think that's what the case was. He was basically her errand boy and her taxi. But more on that later.
Police were able to obtain phone records between Shannon and her driver, detailing 6 calls as well as a brief call to a local CVS at 2:55 a.m. Allegedly, she wanted Pack to run a few errands and pick up lube and a deck of poker cards. Pack claimed that he did not know the area and declined.
So that's what I mean about errand boy.
Yeah.
But essentially, that would be the role, right? If he was helping her out, he would be there to pick up those little sexual necessities and and
but I did
maybe
hear
food.
that this was like common.
Yeah, obviously we're not very familiar with the internal workings of call girls and all of that stuff. When I think of prostitution, and this is how naive I am, I think of streetwalkers or Eileen Wuornos' circumstance.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the professional call girl, which I guess is really common in New York City, by the way. Did not know that. Somewhere between that phone call and 5 a.m., something went terribly wrong in that house. In the wee hours of the morning between 4:30 and 4:51 a.m., the fun had stopped. Pack was being hailed into the home by Joseph Brewer, and he wanted Shannon out, which is what he claimed because things weren't going so well. He said he tried to forcibly remove her from the home, but she wouldn't budge, and he needed the driver to come in and intervene.
Police received a 911 call from Shannon from within the quote-unquote client's home at 4:51, screaming that they were plotting to kill her and she was going to die. This call would last 23 minutes. Allegedly, dispatch could hear an altercation between 2 male voices, thought to be Brewer and Pack, with Shannon. Supposedly, Brewer is demanding that Pack get her out of my house. This next bit of accusation from Brewer is the biggest crock of shit we've frankly ever heard. One Google search will show you that Shannon Gilbert was a young and beautiful woman. Joseph Brewer claims that he and Shannon never even had sex. He didn't pay her, and the reason for this whole altercation was because he thought she was a man.
That's such bullshit.
And that's why he wasn't going to have sex with her. Weird, considering she was very obviously a beautiful woman, and they had been in the same damn house together for over 2 freaking hours.
Yeah, because this is the thing about Joseph Brewer, is he had a history, he was going through a divorce, and he had a history of hiring call girls. So you, who is seasoned in calling these call girls, hang out for someone you think is a man that is so offensive to you for 2 hours, and then she has enough time to call and request lube. That's suspicious. I call bullshit.
Anyway, this woman begged for help for 23 minutes on the phone. By some accounts, they say that Shannon is incoherent on the call and couldn't describe or tell the operator where she was. However, it's also important to note that the 911 phone call has yet to be released to the public or to the family after over a decade of advocacy by Shannon's estate and the public.
After Shannon escaped/ran away from the house, she ran door to door screaming for help before somebody let her in. Finally, she ended up at the door of a retired fraud investigator, Gus Coletti, and Gus tried desperately to get Shannon to calm down, but she was erratic and terrified, and when he finally got police on the phone, she bolted from his house. Gus actually waited for 45 minutes for police to arrive. While he waited, he spotted Shannon hiding from a black SUV that seemed to be searching for her. It drove through the neighborhood very slowly, stopping occasionally, almost if it legitimately was looking for a person that may be hiding. Gus noticed that it seemed to be driven by a middle-aged man of Asian descent, but he could not really see any more than that.
This man was Shannon's driver, Michael Pack. From his perspective, he had only started to work for her a few months ago and believed Shannon was trying to pull one over on him. Remember how we said that drivers got a cut of the profits? Pack thought Shannon was bolting off to stiff him. So he began searching the neighborhood for her. He claims to have searched for her till the sun came up, claiming to also have never spotted her or the police before he headed home.
Gilbert disappeared into the night, never to be seen alive again. Just about everyone in the neighborhood had heard her screaming for help that night, so the neighbors called in noise complaints and suspicious activity. Gus called, even giving the police explicit details, but no one arrived for over an hour from Shannon's initial phone call. And this is where the known events, and I use that phrase very lightly, of May 1st come to a screeching halt. Bear in mind, aside from the phone call, we are now going based off of the accounts of 2 potential suspects.
Right.
So we have the driver and we have the client, and they're the ones relaying this information of what supposedly transpired and why the car was driving suspiciously through the neighborhood.
Well, and Brewer is very suspicious.
Yeah. Gilbert wouldn't be reported missing for 2 days, and only after her on-again, off-again boyfriend grew very concerned that she hadn't returned home. A little bit of a backstory here. I didn't include his actual name because he's not a suspect.
It's not really relevant.
It's not really relevant. But it is worth mentioning that they had a tumultuous relationship, and he knew that she was in the call girl business, prostitution, yada, yada. Wasn't really bothered by it, sometimes participated in it.
But he was concerned.
He was very concerned. He got in touch with her driver, which led him to Brewer. Her boyfriend continued to investigate where she was, where she may have gone, and tried to retrace the steps based on the information that the driver and the client gave to him. But essentially, he found nothing. Shannon's boyfriend then confronted Joseph Brewer, bringing a gun with him just in case. Because in his mind, his girlfriend has been missing for 2 days.
Right.
She hasn't called him, hasn't said anything.
And this is the last dude who saw her.
Yeah, and it's 2010. So he's not playing around.
No.
Fortunately, Joseph seemed to cooperate, and it was even said to have been helpful, and literally went to the police department with the boyfriend, and the police promptly did fuck all to help them. In fact, the boyfriend claims that the police practically laughed them both out of the station.
And unfortunately, this is where the story gets even fucking weirder. Like, super
weird.
Fucking weird, super fucking fast. 2 days after her disappearance, Shannon's mother, Mary, received the most bizarre phone call from a complete and total stranger. And this is a direct quote
from
Mary. Hello, my name is Dr. Peter Hackett. I'm calling to see if your daughter Shannon is there. As you can imagine, Mary is startled. She tells him no, wants to know why he's calling and who the heck he is. This Dr. Hackett, or Dr. Douchebag, as we'll affectionately call him, spews off some bullshit story about how he runs a home for quote-unquote wayward girls where Shannon had been staying for 2 days. Side note, Shannon lived with the
aforementioned boyfriend.
Yeah, and had been staying with him. She made decent money as an escort. She didn't need a halfway house. This is ridiculous. He then explains to Mary how Shannon had been with him for 2 days prior to when she went missing to the rest of the world. Anyways, Dr. Douchebag goes on to give more of a bullshit story, saying that he had gotten Mary's number because all of the girls who check into his quote-unquote center must fill out an emergency contact, and that Shannon left his home with her driver out of nowhere, and he was calling to see if she was Mary. What the actual fuck?
Mary even said that Shannon never would have given her a number up like that. They had a tumultuous relationship. Mary would become Shannon's biggest advocate in this whole thing. She was essentially doing the police work that the police were not doing.
Right.
However, we will find out that Shannon had a troublesome childhood that was exacerbated with her mother. The Gilbert family files a missing persons report, and somehow the police don't seem to link this report of Shannon being missing with the events of May 1st together. And then the family decides to put hoofs to the pavement and go knocking door to door in the Oak Beach community. And you want to know why I'm so affectionately calling that doctor Dr. Douchebag? This man calls this poor missing woman's mother up with some cockamamie story, and then a week later comes into contact with Mary again as they're going door to door, but would tell police, oh no, I never called her before. When she came door to door, that was the first time I'd ever spoken to her.
Fucking weird.
Why lie about calling her? Why call her? Why he didn't run anything for wayward girls? What the fuck is actually going on with this bullshit doctor? The Gilberts ultimately let the police know this guy is weird. This is what happened. We have no idea what his involvement is in this. But of course, nothing was ever done, and it's basically just assumed that Dr. Douchebag's only role in this entire story was that of a serial attention seeker, a nosy Nelly, and an inconsiderate asshat.
Regardless, no official search for Shannon would take place for over a month after she was reported missing. In fact, the Gilberts say they had to harass the police for 7 months before any real police work was actually done. 7 months of just not looking for somebody who was reported missing.
After over a year and a half of searching, her remains were found just before Christmas on December 13th, 2011, in an Oak Beach marsh, not far from where she was last seen. It's during the search for Shannon when police accidentally discovered the bodies of at least 8 other women, 1 man in women's clothing, and even more shocking, the remains of a toddler in the sand dunes along the shore near Oak and Gilgo Beach. This gruesome discovery came to be associated with that of a serial killer, eventually carrying the monikers that we know today of LISK, Lisk, the Long Island serial killer, the Gilgo Beach killer, and finally the Craigslist Ripper.
Now, one would assume that due to the proximity of Shannon's remains to that of the victims of Lisk in that eerie 23-minute 911 phone call, her case would have been immediately, even eventually, linked to those murders. But she wasn't. In fact, this is one of the many twists and turns in this story. Shannon's death was ruled by the police to be an accidental drowning. Which, how? Why? How do we get here?
Stigma, Chelsea. Personally, in my biased opinion, stigma.
Shannon was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was coping with depression. Police take a closer look at the young woman, discovering she had a troubled childhood and suffered physical and emotional abuse. She even spent a significant amount of time in and out of the foster care system. As a teenager, she had an on-again, off-again experimental relationship with drugs. However, she did well enough in school and actually graduated a year early.
The kid had a fucked up childhood, but still did well for herself, and her relationship with drugs seemed to be nothing more than kind of what teenagers go through.
Yeah.
And even, talking to the boyfriend and all of that, it didn't seem as though she was a drug addict. And the whole being bipolar, coping with depression, that doesn't mean that you're a maniac,
bad person,
psychopath.
We have talked extensively about bipolar disorder on this podcast before, so
I don't know.
To get by independently from her mom, Shannon worked a series of jobs. By day, she was sometimes an Applebee's hostess or a snack prepper for a retirement home, and by night, she began working as a call girl.
From the moment her family learned about her new occupation, they were worried. Every girl born into the world hears horror stories of what can happen to sex workers. But Shannon was beautiful and it was good money, so she assured her loved ones that would never be her, that she was safe, she was taken care of. And it's because of her occupation and her mental illness that Shannon's family is convinced the police did not consider her disappearance a priority. And if we are being frank,
which we always are,
how many other times in the past 3 seasons of The Killer Tea have we seen this exact thing happen in our research? Police investigators not taking the disappearances of women who are on the outskirts of society, who are disenfranchised, mentally ill, or known drug addicts seriously.
If you are on the fringes of society, they're not going to bother.
If you are curious, by the way, Urban Justice actually worked with the Sex Workers Project at the Urban Justice Center on a research project about how sex workers feel in their relationship with police and how many of them actually would go and seek help from the police and the statistics there. Highly recommend it. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but suffice it to say, it's an interesting read, and sex workers don't bother to let the officers know that bad things happen to them because they're never taken seriously. So check it out, sexworkersproject.org. But anyways.
I mean, we're not saying that that's definitely true in Shannon's case, that the police completely ignored her. I mean, like, kind of the evidence is there, but, you know, do what you will. But how do 8 sex workers go missing in a tiny 8-mile stretch of Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach in a 10-year period and nobody notices or nothing is done with it? No.
Investigators ultimately believed then, and still believe now, that there was no actual foul play in Shannon's death. It was the accidental drowning of a mentally ill woman, even though the autopsy was inconclusive.
I'm not like an autopsy expert or anything by those means. Neither of us are. But I always thought that a drowning victim was obviously a drowning victim. That was my understanding.
What they're essentially saying is that she lost her shit after going to a client's house, ran off, was having a bipolar episode, and then somehow drowned. Drowned herself. Accidental drowning in the marsh. In the marsh.
It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I don't get it either. But definitely more work should have been done into finding out what was going on. And regardless, no matter what you think of the police's estimation of events, it was clear that Shannon's tragic death aside, there was a deranged serial killer loose in Long Island, because we found those other dismembered bodies and skeletal remains. So stepping back from Gilbert's death, let's backtrack and discuss how the now identified bodies of the 8 missing women were discovered.
There were 4 women discovered near Gilgo Beach, and they were called the Gilgo Four. While not the first young woman to be killed in this timeline, the body of Melissa Barthelemy was the first to be discovered while they were searching for Shannon. Melissa was last seen on July 12, 2009. While her time of death is uncertain, her body was in its final stages of decomposition when observed in the bush, something that takes months to unfold. She too was working as a sex worker and using Craigslist to find clients. Barthelemy's family did not know she was working as a sex worker at the time. Regardless, when she went missing, they contacted the NYPD to file a missing persons report. Lynn Barthelemy, Melissa's mom, was shocked and appalled that the police seemed completely uninterested in helping. Lynn says they told her, "She's 24. She's not on any psych meds. She's not missing. She's where she wants to be." Lynn heard that same response over and over again for 3 days. The family even hired an attorney, desperately hoping his presence would force the police into action. However, even the involvement of an attorney didn't seem to inspire any action either.
According to their attorney, police said, "She's a hooker. She's a prostitute. She's an escort. We're not going to assign a detective to this." And yet another bizarre twist and turn in this story. 1 week after Melissa disappeared, her little sister received a chilling phone call from Melissa's phone. Only it wasn't Melissa on the other end. According to the family's attorney, Stephen Cohen, he quoted Amanda about the phone call, saying, "He was soft-spoken and he had a very controlled and comfortable manner of speech, which made his horrific messages all the more devastating. He began to toy with her, and for the very first time, she heard the voice of the killer."
Suffolk County Police told 48 Hours, who was reporting on the case at the time, that they believe the caller was in fact Melissa's killer. Shockingly, the calls were not just a one and done. In fact, they just kept coming. The killer would end up calling from Melissa's phone a total of 8 times, all the while evading police tracking him down. It seems as though the killer was not just adept at killing and dismembering, but also well educated in the police investigation tactics.
Mind you, her little sister's 15 years old.
I know.
Could you imagine? Okay, your sister's missing, and then you get a phone call from her phone, and the flood of joy and relief that you would feel. She's been gone for a week now, and suddenly you're hearing from her. Oh my God. Like chills.
After the third call, authorities had a hunch that the killer wasn't ready to be done talking to Amanda. They decided to tap Amanda's phone and attempt to trace the calls. However, the killer was evasive and clever. He picked busy, touristy places in New York where cell phone traffic would be immense and convoluted, and he always seemed to know when the call should end before police could get specifics out of the call.
In one particular phone call, the killer actually spoke to Lynn, Melissa's mother. During this call, he claimed to be with the NYPD and seemed to be very interested in knowing whether or not the family had filed a missing persons report on Melissa. And to add how fucked the entire situation was, the killer hyperfixated on that 15-year-old sister. It was in these calls that he would detail disgusting and sexually explicit things that he had done to torture Melissa, and he threatened that he would come do them to Amanda as well. He told her that he knew where she lived and she would be next. The lured caller sought out poor Amanda for the final time on August 26, 2009, with a message that shook her to her core. Do you know what I did to your sister? I killed Melissa. And that was the last time that she ever heard from him.
On September 2nd, 2010, Amber Costello, 27 and a sex worker, left her house in North Bayonne to see a client who was pretty urgent about wanting her services, reportedly calling several times and offering Amber a large amount of cash compared to her usual rates. Sadly, her body was found a few months later on December 13, 2010, near Gilgo Beach. She had been strangled with burlap. Megan Waterman, a 22-year-old young woman, was last seen on June 6, 2010 while on her way to a convenience store. She was spotted on the security of the hotel she had been staying at around 1:30 a.m. Megan's body was discovered also on December 13, 2010 beside Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. Her death was ruled a homicide by strangulation with burlap, just like Amber.
Maureen Barnes, 25, was last seen on July 9th of 2007 at her hotel where she had been planning to meet up with clients. Sadly, she would never return home to her two babies, one that was 8 years old and the other that was just 12 months old at the time of her disappearance. She, again, like the others, was an escort. The other 4 victims would later be identified as Jessica Taylor, 20, whose unidentified torso remains were found back in 2003 in Manorville, New York, but her head and her hands were found during the search for Shannon. Jessica also worked as an escort. Valeria Mack, just like Jessica, also had unidentified remains discovered in 2000 in Manorville, but were not linked to her until May 28, 2020, due to genetic genealogy. 2020. Last year, during the pandemic. And once again, she was also a Craigslist escort, last seen in the spring months of 2000. That's insane.
And she was just a kid too, 20 years old.
All of them were babies. They were babies.
Speaking of babies, trigger warning, we're actually going to talk about the toddler. We're not going to discuss the remains of a little girl, just 2 years old, discovered along with the other bodies. She was badly decomposed. No details have been given in regards to how this baby died. The remains of a still unidentifiable man of Asian descent was the final and third body discovered by police on Gilgo Beach during the April search. He was also young, anywhere from 17 to 23 at the time of death, but had been gone a very long time, likely almost a decade. It's not clear if the young man and the child's deaths are linked to Lisk, but police do have reason to believe they might have something to do with the illegal sex trade.
That could be a whole nother episode, by the way.
Really could be.
During this April 2011 search, police would uncover 3 more female victims. One was believed to be the mother of the found toddler. The other was discovered by a hiker spotting a mysterious-looking storage container.
Oh, and he opened it. Don't ever open storage containers you find on the side of the road or on the beach, folks.
He discovered a woman's torso in a plastic bag inside. The victim had a discernible tattoo of a peach on her left breast. The police call her Peaches, and I find this to be so gross, so I was not going to refer to her as Peaches. More and more victims would be discovered, but never officially linked, aside from speculations of the internet sleuths. There was a dismembered body of a woman that washed up on Harbor Island Park on March 3rd, 2007. Over a couple days, more parts of her body would emerge on the beach. She also had a tattoo on her left breast. This one was of cherries. They weren't related. They were two totally different girls. I don't want it to seem like they were the same body. Another Jane Doe, again also discovered on April 11, 2011, was linked to the found decapitated skull of an unidentified woman known only as the Fire Island Jane Doe in 1996. So bear in mind, while some of these aren't officially linked, we have a lot of dismemberment going on, a lot of young women, a lot of prostitutes, and some of these are dating back to the 90s, to the 80s. This guy has been active
For a while.
for a long time.
Now, if you'll remember Tina Foglia, whom we mentioned at the start of the podcast, she was just 19 in February of 1982, dismembered in bags. Many believe she was one of the first, if not the first, of the Long Island serial killer victims. Interestingly enough, she disappeared after meeting up with a young doctor for a date.
Could it have been
Dr. Douchebag?
I wonder.
Tanya Rush, at 39, would be the oldest victim of Lisk if her murder is ever officially linked. Her dismembered body was found on June 27, 2008. She was a mother and, like most of these young women mentioned, turned to sex work to make ends meet.
The human remains of a young woman, potentially in her 20s, wearing a gold pig necklace was discovered by a woman walking her dog along the beach in the winter of early 2013. While this beach is 40 minutes away from Gilgo Beach, where all the other murders took place, or at least the body drops took place, it doesn't mean that she couldn't be another victim of Lisk. And finally, lastly, there was the body of a 31-year-old victim, Natasha Jugo, who was also discovered in June of 2013. She was last seen March 16th, 2013, and her car was found abandoned a day after her disappearance with more of her personal belongings that had been inside of the vehicle found on the beach close by. While the 6 women have not officially been connected to Lisk, you cannot deny the commonalities. And even if they are not linked, what the fuck is going on in Gilgo, Long Island?
Oh my God, what kind of person would do something like this? I mean, really?
Well, since we're not licensed psychologists, we have to ask the Google machine and research it. In 2014, Scott A. Bond, a PhD in criminologist, crime expert, and analyst for CNN, Fox News, HLN, CBS, HuffPost, all of those to name a few, he actually wrote an article for Psychology Today on the profile of the Long Island serial killer. In the article, Dr. Bond describes Lisk as an organized killer. Now remember, kids, serial killers are profiled as either organized or disorganized killers. And he is likely a white male in his 30s or 40s. I know, you're shocked, at the time of most of the killings.
According to Dr. Bond, Lisk plans his killings in great detail. He's very careful and methodic. He uses Craigslist to control how and when he meets his victims. He's probably married or at least has a girlfriend, smart, probably fairly charming and disarming, and does well for himself. Like many New Yorkers who use Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach as a vacation destination, Lisk is probably not a permanent resident of the area, but as a vacationer would know the Long Island area and all its beaches in great detail, meticulously able to select his victims, dismember, and then dispose of them without being caught.
Imagine how much control he actually has by posting the ad on Craigslist and then being able to pick his victims as they're responding to his ad. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are essentially coming in his house, his terms, and he is fully prepared, and they're just blindsided.
And I remember seeing when I was watching the 60 Minutes coverage of this, that all of these girls who were escorts, what they could find out about them is that most of these girls were of the higher end escorts, like charging over $200 an hour.
Speaking to that, whenever one of them was getting a offer of $1,500, that was like bad and bougie.
Right.
They were like, all right, let's do this. So he's enticing them essentially.
Yep.
Dr. Braun details in his Psychology Today article that he firmly believes these killings will not stop until the Long Island serial killer is caught. And frankly, I'm inclined to agree with him. In my opinion, this killer is a man addicted to killing. kind of like a drug addict. And I'm so shocked that even in the 2010s, no male DNA has been linked to anyone conclusively. I mean, we have gone so far in forensics since 2010.
Right.
It's 2021. Look, this is over a decade now, just from Shannon's.
I know. So who are the suspects, really? Let's talk about them. Netflix did a really fantastic film that focused heavily on Dr. Douchebag, Dr. Peter Hackett, called Lost Girls. This is actually a fictional interpretation, but it brings a very important narrative to these list cases. These victims are people. They are not just sex workers. They're not just hookers, not just call girls. These are people with real lives and real families and people who are going to miss them. They were somebody's baby who was adored and loved, and their entire life is disregarded because of their occupation. And if you know us, we are raging feminists, and we find that to be disgusting. And by allowing Mary Gilbert to be the vessel for this dialogue, you are forced to truly feel the humanity of each one of those quote-unquote lost girls.
If you have not watched this, watch it. Holly from The Office, her real name isn't Holly, but I forgot to look up the actress. The girl who plays Holly plays Mary Lambert, and she plays it so well. It's so good. Totally recommend it. But remember, it is a work of fiction based on
the
real
list
life.
killers.
Discovery Plus, on the other hand, pins dirty cop Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke and their documentary Unraveled, based on a podcast of the same name. I have not listened to the podcast, but I did watch the documentary. I do highly recommend watching it, but if I was going to break down that angle, I mean, it would just take so long.
We would need like a whole other episode.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not 100% sure I'm on the same page as the conclusions that they found. However, you just have to watch it. But in short, he's a rotten police chief that has a lot to lose by allowing the FBI, who desperately wanted to come in and investigate. He finds a way to block them, and you find out that he's super corrupted, he's sex crazed, he's actually entangled in the Long Island sex workers himself, and they potentially even call into question whether or not he had some involvement in Lisk. There's a potential narrative even of there being two serial killers that are actually the Long Island serial killer.
John Bitrolf is a convicted serial killer and a likely suspect for Lisk. Bitrolf was originally arrested when his DNA was found on the bodies of two homicide victims, Colleen McNamee and Rita Tingretti, whose bodies were found in 1993 and 1994. Bitrolf was a carpenter who lived in Manorville, where the torsos of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack were discovered. Interestingly enough, their remains were found just 3 miles away from Bitrolf's residence. Suspicious. A further link between Bitrolf and the Long Island serial case has been established. The adult daughter of one of Bitrolf's victims, Rita Tingretti, was reportedly best friends with Melissa Barthelemy, one of the first Lisk victims discovered at Gilgo Beach. Melissa Barthelemy's mother also reported to authorities that her daughter had a lot of calls to Manorville from her phone at the time of her disappearance.
And lastly, we have James Bisset. Bisset was one of the suspects of the case because he was the main supplier of burlap in the region of Long Island. The killer used burlap to strangle women whose remains were found in the area during the investigation. I couldn't really find very much more details on that as to why being a supplier of burlap would make you a suspect.
I mean, burlap is pretty common. Anyone can get burlap.
Yeah, so I couldn't really get an answer there. However, unfortunately, Bisset could not be interrogated because he ultimately had taken his life while in his car at a park. So this begs to question, how could a case like this turn up such little evidence? Little suspect, little evidence. Numerous bodies. Very large body count. Not a whole lot to go on.
Right.
So far, according to authorities, all we have is a belt believed to belong to the serial killer that was discovered at one of the crime scenes, and a few pieces of gold jewelry found belonging to the victims still on their bodies.
While advancements in forensics like genetic genealogy have allowed for many of the Jane Does to be identified, there is still no known DNA for any potential suspects that has been revealed to the public. In conclusion, only the deaths of Maureen Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, Jessica Taylor, Valerie Mack, the Asian John Doe, the baby Jane Doe, and the peach tattoo Jane Doe and the Fire Island Jane Doe have officially been linked to Lisk.
Unfortunately, at the time of this recording, which is May 23rd, 2021, Shannon Gilbert, Andre Isaac, the Jane Doe with the cherry tattoo, Tanya Rush, Tina Foglia, and the Asian Jane Doe remain unlinked to the killings, and their murders are still unsolved. It's sad that there actually are so many Jane Does remaining in this case. You would think, as far as everything that would come, at least we would have names for the bodies. Mm-hmm. But a startling thing about this case is there's so much dismemberment, and like the skeletal remains are found like a mile away from the other parts of the body, found at different time periods.
Yeah, it's really weird.
How do
you go to these beaches?
That's what I was getting ready to say.
See bodies.
These are high traffic areas. They're the beach. Even if it is the marsh or the bush, like this is where New Yorkers go to get away. There's so much foot traffic there. How does that happen? As a matter of fact, that Discovery Plus documentary kind of goes into detail over that. There is tons of media surrounding this case. We could honestly go on forever and ever. And it really sucks to have a unsolved serial killer case because we're so used to having not revenge, but justice.
Yeah.
And so far, no justice has been served. And I guess maybe that's why we needed to cover something like this, because the more interest, the more conversations, the more likely that police will feel pressured to find some shit out and not let this case run cold.
Maybe do something about it.
We're not being critical. We're just a little critical. We're always critical.
We're always critical. Don't listen if you don't like critical.
Yeah, seriously.
Dahmer scale.
Haven't
done this in a hot minute.
He's a 10 out of 10 for me.
Yeah.
You don't get much sicker than that. Because we haven't caught him, we don't actually know, like, how much torturing is going on. Mm-hmm. We don't know the level of depravity that he may have defiled the bodies.
There's not a lot of known stuff. And he could still be killing people in another location in the country, and we may not even know.
That's something that the crime analyst mentioned, was that by now, with all the attention, he probably went into panic mode and has probably since relocated. But he did not believe for a second that would mean that this killer was done.
I mean, how many serial killers, though, have we covered who were caught that have said that they would have gone on to keep killing?
Yeah, if they hadn't been caught.
I mean, look at, I know we talk about him a lot, but Edmund Kemper, he has been up for parole several times and has said he will never leave prison. He will never file for parole because he knows he will kill people.
This guy has to be smart. I'm inclined to think that maybe he was involved in the police department in some way, or is some sort of potentially powerful figure.
Right.
These are rich people living on the beach. Why is he picking this area? Doesn't it blow your mind how someone like the Zodiac Killer, who didn't realistically have that high of a body count, but has a lot of mystery around them, and it was more your average Joe kids, teenagers, young adults that were his chosen victims, but this person is dismembering human beings and leaving them on the beach for tourists to find, and
there's not a lot about him.
There's not like a lot of lore. There's not a lot of... If you said the Long Island serial killer, I'd probably, before I did all this research, vaguely know what you were talking about. But if you say the Zodiac, you say Ted Bundy.
Know who the fuck they are.
Yeah, you know exactly who the fuck they are. If you say Manson, I mean...
He's not even a serial killer.
Not that I'm saying that, like, these serial killers themselves
I know what you mean, but
attention.
There are specific names that you just know who they are.
Is it because they're prostitutes? I think it's because they're prostitutes.
It could be.
And I think that's bullshit. And that's why you should watch The Lost Girls on Netflix. We are not sponsored, but it's a damn good film. All right, anyways, we need to Let's uplift. We need a palate cleanser.
We need to lighten the mood.
Palate cleanser. This is the palate cleanser. Give me all of your jokes that are in terrible taste and make us horrible human beings.
What do serial killers and people who eat fried chicken have in common?
What?
They both think the skin is the best part.
Oh, barf. Oh, that's so gross. Okay.
You call a serial killer who kills 2 people in 1 year, 4 the next, and 16 the year after.
What?
A second-degree murderer.
Oh my God. I was just I'm not going to lie, for a half a second, I panicked and I was like, don't make me do math. Don't make me do math.
What does a serial killer eat when he's on a budget?
I don't know what.
Raw men.
Oh, God.
Terrible.
These are horrible.
According to the FBI, the number of serial killers is decreasing every year, thanks to those goddamn lazy millennials who can't commit to a single thing. Are millennials killing the serial killer industry? I will happily take the blame for that one. Oh my God. If you are being chased by a serial killer, both of you are running for your life.
That's fantastic. That was clever. I'm a fan.
What do serial killers and ball sacks have in common?
Oh, I don't know.
They're both nutcases.
God.
So
That's
stupid.
like a dad serial
That's
killer
a dad-
joke.
That is a dad serial killer joke. Mom, when I grow up, I want to be a serial killer. Don't do that, honey. You don't know how to clean up properly after yourself.
True.
True.
Also true.
Told my girlfriend that I've started writing a book about a serial killer that murders his lover. She said, that sounds exciting. I love thrillers. I said, it's not a thriller. It's an autobiography.
Oh, God.
Anyways, okay, so that was the Long Island serial killer.
Yes.
I'm excited that we're recording and we're getting back into our
I
groove
just
thing. Are
touch
you
your
trying to
feet?
play footsie with
Sorry, I
me?
didn't mean to touch your feet.
Weirdo.
When you're just, Coach in here, can I talk to you about your extended warranty and your feet? Fuck off. All right, guys, you know the drill. Like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram.
Twitter.
You can go on Twitter, but we don't go
I don't really post on Twitter.
We are continuing to post on YouTube. We've actually gotten a significant amount of subscribers there lately, so yay! That's where all the boys who listen to our podcast like to go and tell us how terrible we are.
We are nasally Midwesterners with horrible voices.
And they don't like us. They
don't.
let us know on YouTube a lot more than anywhere else. And I always respond, well, normally I say we don't respond to haters because, whatever. But I love responding with a little smiley face that says, thank you. But you know the drill.
Like us, leave us a review if you can.
Yeah.
And we love you so much.
And we love you so much. Until next time.
Bye!
Join us in the next episode where we discuss Vasily Komarov.
The Wolf of Moscow.
And just as a reminder, Chelsea is not a licensed psychologist, but she has done extensive research. And by the way, motherfucker, she has a bachelor's degree in it. I just had to drop that in there because Chelsea and I are in a lot of podcasting groups, and the Serial Killers podcast gets shit on a lot for saying that little intro.
Yeah.
But just a little legal tidbit for you guys, they have to say that.